Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new here. My name is Natalia Leigh. I'm the managing editor at Enchanted Ink Publishing, and I write spicy romance under the pen name Emberly Wyndham. And today I am going to be giving you tips for revising a first draft. Now, even getting to the point where you have a first draft that's ready for what I would generally call a developmental edit, but depending on whether you think that you have a zero draft or a first draft, you might just be trying to get it into a place where the story actually makes sense, and that's fine too. And it's difficult enough getting there, and I know this personally because it took me so many years to finally finish a book, and for many years I thought I would never be able to do it. So once you finally are able to write the end, it can be a little bit intimidating to then look at all of those words and all of those pages and wonder, how do I even begin to edit this into something that not only I will enjoy, but that my readers will enjoy as well. And I am currently editing. I'm doing the developmental edits on the second book in my Coven Crest Academy series. This is book 1, A Witch and Her Dragon. I'm doing the developmental edit now for book 2, A Witch and Her Minotaur. It's available for pre-order now. It comes out on October 3rd. I will have that linked down below if you're interested. The pre-order is at a discounted price, and then after release day, it's going to be going up to full price. So if you like cozy academia and cozy spicy romance, you can check that out down below. But anyway, as I am working on this developmental revision, I thought this would be the perfect opportunity to sit down and tell you my tips for how to tackle a first draft. And I'm gonna go about this in 2 ways. I'm going to start by sharing with you how I used to edit my drafts when I was new to the process. A Witch and Her Minotaur, again, which comes out in October, that's going to be my 14th published book. It'll be my 10th published book under my Emberly pen name. So I have done this process many times, and not only that, but I have also worked with many hundreds of authors on their first drafts and on developing their books. So I have a lot of experience at this point in terms of developmental revision and how to take a first draft and turn it into something that's a lot more coherent and a lot more enjoyable. And I'm gonna give you the tips that I used to use and kind of the process that I used to use for my developmental revisions. And then I'm going to share with you how I revise my books now as somebody who has so much more experience and so many more books under my belt. So if you have written a first draft, or if you are getting very close to finishing your first draft and you want some actionable steps and tips regarding how to edit that manuscript, you are in the right place. So go ahead and grab maybe a snack, something to drink, a notebook to write your notes in, and let's go ahead and get started. Okay, I'm gonna have to take a sip of water too. We're having a lot of wildfires in Colorado right now, and the air is so polluted with smoke. So I'm kind of coughing and sneezing, and it's just been a hard couple of days. So I might have to pause throughout to drink some water. So I have here this old notebook. I mean, it's so old that literally the interior has come loose of the binding and it's all falling out. And I have all the steps written here that I used to use to edit my first drafts. And I wrote this list many years ago. And I'm glad that I wrote this down because as I was kind of preparing for this video, I was struggling a little bit to remember exactly what my process used to be. But I found it in this old notebook, so I'm gonna be able to reference this, tell you exactly how I used to edit my first drafts, and then I'll tell you how I do it now. And it's honestly a lot simpler now. But this method I'm about to share with you, this was the method I used when I was still very new to storytelling and very new to just writing a coherent story and making sure that everything made sense from beginning to end. My plot threads were woven through, you know, everything was tied up nicely. That was really a struggle for me when I started writing, and it can be a struggle for many people. So there are a lot more steps that we're gonna be going over for this version of editing a first draft versus what I do now. First thing is to finish the book and then let it sit. If you have never finished a book before, if this is the first draft that you finished, you might feel one of two ways. You might feel like, I really need to put this down because I am so sick of this project and I can't look at it anymore. But you also might be feeling so excited and joyful to have finished a first draft that you immediately just want to go back to page 1 and start revising. And my suggestion, step 1, is to let the book sit, get a little bit of distance from it. And this helps because it allows the story to kind of sink in, but it also gives you the distance you need to start seeing it with clarity. If you are grinding on this story every day and you finish the book and then you immediately go back to page 1 and start trying to revise it or clean it up, it's almost like you can't see the forest for the trees. You are just much too close to it. And I have had this experience many times, and I know that it always helps to take a step back. And you can determine for yourself how long that break needs to be. For me, where I'm at, I typically like taking about 2 weeks off. That works really well for my process. So the story is still fresh enough that I generally know what I was doing and kind of the different subplots that I was juggling, and yet 2 weeks is enough distance that I can kind of put it from my mind, let it just settle in, and then come back with fresh eyes. So step 1 is to let it sit. Step 2, and I used to love this step of the process so much. My mom would help me with this because she worked at a school and she had access to printers. Step 2 is to print out your book. There is something really special about seeing your book on paper. And of course, if this isn't totally accessible to you, you could also put it on an e-reader or load it into a program that can read it back to you. I know Microsoft Word can. I don't know if it's very good or not. I've not used that function really. But essentially, you want to be able to read or listen to your book without having the ability to start changing things. Because as you start this process, you're probably going to start coming across things that you want to change. Whether it's switching out, phrasing and words that you're using, or whether you got a character's name wrong, or you know that you took a plot thread in a different direction, you're gonna have this desire, probably, to immediately start revising this book. But when you're learning how to do this big first draft developmental revision for the first time, I don't recommend doing that. I really recommend printing it out or getting some sort of other access to it and reading the entire book without making a single change. Now, while you're reading the book or listening to the book, if you would prefer it on audio, keep track of anything that you're thinking of. Keep notes to yourself. If you're working on paper, you can mark it up, which is always a lot of fun. Highlight things, write in the margins, circle things that you love, cross things out. Really feel free to engage with it in this way. This is really your opportunity to tear the story apart if you need to, so that you can rebuild it in the right way. I often like to think of stories as like a skeleton, and you're putting all of these bones together, and sometimes the first time you put them together, you get them wrong. Most things might kind of be in place, but you might need to also move bones around and make sure that you're getting it, completely constructed in the way that it needs to be in order to function properly. So this is the opportunity for you to make all those notes, to scribble down any ideas that you have, cross things out, etc. But it's really important to do all of this and read the entire book before you actually get back into your document, your Word document or Google Docs, whatever you're using. Get this done first before pulling up your actual document before you make any changes. Now, the other thing that I used to really enjoy doing while I was working through the read through of my first draft was creating kind of an updated outline. And this works really well, especially if you are a pantser and you weren't originally working off of an outline. Even if you're a pantser, there does come a point when you need to be able to kind of look at your story as a whole, understand how it's functioning, and look at it from kind of a more critical and logical perspective. So I always think, if you're a pantser, that's fantastic. Pants your first draft. But when it comes to editing, it really helps if you have a book map or if you have a book outline. So while you're reading, I suggest creating a new outline for yourself, especially because outlines can change. I outline every single book I write, and that book always ends up different. I never follow that outline 100%. So when you're reading through, start summarizing what happens in every single chapter. This can feel a little bit tedious, especially if you forget to do it for a few and then you have to go back and catch up. But believe me, it's going to come in handy later. So while you're doing that first read, summarize every single chapter as you go along. These summaries can be as detailed or as brief as you would like, whatever works for your process. But we want to be able to have a really quick snapshot of what is happening in every single chapter, and that will give us that overview of the book we need in order to truly understand how it's playing out and where gaps or excess story content that we don't need might be. All right, so once you have the first read through done, you've made your notes, you've created that chapter by chapter summary, this is a great place to pull out, if you have them, a craft book or like a story structure book. And these books, Save the Cat Writes a Novel by Jessica Brody, and then Romancing the Beat by Gwen Hayes. These books have been incredibly helpful to me personally. I will have them linked down below. I was somebody who always really kind of struggled with plotting and struggled with story structure until I started reading these story beat craft books and understanding which kind of external and internal beats I wanted to hit. And that doesn't mean that you have to follow it like a formulaic approach to writing, but especially when you're new to this, it can help so much having guideposts along the way so that you can then look at your chapters and ask yourself, I have some written down here, do you have the inciting incident? Do you have the rising action, crisis, darkest moment, climax, the resolution? There are so many beats, especially in Save the Cat Writes a Novel. There are so many beats to hit. And by making sure that you're hitting those beats, or at least hitting most of them, depending on how your story is unfolding, we can be more sure that we are delivering a full, fulfilling, and satisfying read to our readers. Because I cannot tell you the number of books I've written that hit a few beats and then suddenly they lose themselves. And it's usually in Act 2. Act 2 is really, really difficult to write. It's kind of like the muddy middle. Many writers struggle with it. But if you have some reference books that give you plot beats, it can help guide you through Act 2. And you can just, again, you can be more sure that you are crafting something that is going to be satisfying to your reader. So that is why having that chapter by chapter outline is so, so helpful, because then when you're sitting down to ask yourself, you know, do I have the inciting incident? Do I have the debate beat? Do I have the beat where we really clearly transition from the Act 1 world into the Act 2 world? Fun and games, midpoint, bad guys close in. There is just so much great information in this book that if you haven't picked it up yet, I highly recommend it. And again, if you are writing romance, Romancing the Beat is a great one as well. And like I said, those will be linked down below if you want to grab one for yourself. All right, so you have created your chapter by chapter outline. You are now looking at your story beats. This is the point where you can, even if you're a pantser, start kind of re-outlining your book. It's always good to go back to your original outline and look at it, look at what you were trying to achieve, determine if you think you achieved that thing, look at what you actually wrote. And from here, if there are chapters that need to be added, you know, big scenes that got missed, or maybe you have a bunch of scenes that you know were fun to write, but they're just excess and they're kind of baggage and they're not taking the story anywhere. They're not moving our characters forward. They're just kind of junk scenes. I guess I shouldn't say it like that. That's a negative way to say it. But even if they're fun and they're beautiful scenes, if they don't take the story forward, you either need to cut them, and that's the whole like killing your darlings thing, or you need to make them important enough to warrant keeping them in the book. And this is the moment to determine that. You can take this new outline that you've built for yourself, you can put chapters in, take chapters out, move scenes around if you need to, and it's going to give you a map before you even start revising the book. Before you've even touched that first draft file, you're going to have this chapter by chapter summary and outline that has now been revised and updated to give you the map and the guidepost you need as you start that first revision. Okay, the next step is the pretty intimidating one, and that is actually getting started on revising your book. And there are a couple ways that you can go about this, just depending on what your process is, how your brain works, how much work you know that you need to do to this book. And I would suggest that you make kind of a game plan. You know, are you going to be an author who goes through the entire book and tries to do everything at once? Are you going to be the type of author who says, okay, this first pass is just going to be adding the new scenes that I need and cutting the ones that I don't, and I'm not going to bother with anything else? Or, you know, maybe you're going to try to do a little bit of both. Like, you have some big picture items that you know really need to get done and you're going to focus on, but maybe you allow yourself to also play with some line level editing, or you are updating little details as you go along. This is one of those things that is going to be different for every single writer. If I am remembering correctly, looking back, I think I always preferred doing big revisions. So I would do everything that I possibly could in the first round of revision, and then I would do another one. And I would go back in, reread draft 2, and then again, make another game plan for myself, go back in, revise the whole thing. And that for me worked well because I like to work in a linear manner. I don't like to jump around. I generally don't ever skip chapters or scenes when I'm writing. I try to write everything and get it all done, you know, A through Z. That's just the way that my brain works. So I liked doing those really big revisions, but there are plenty of authors who don't want to take such a big bite out of their first, you know, developmental revision. So if you're somebody who wants to break it up into smaller bites and do multiple rounds of revision, that can work well also. And that leads us up to finishing your first round of developmental revisions. So regardless of whether you choose to do one big one or multiple small ones, you're going to end up with an updated draft. And from there, either you will need to look at it and determine for yourself, do I feel like this is ready for beta readers if you're going to go that direction? Is this ready for maybe a manuscript critique or a developmental edit? Do I want to, you know, seek out professional services and get professional eyes on this? Or maybe you're really not sure and you want to give it to like a trusted alpha reader, somebody who will hopefully be gentle with you while also giving you constructive criticism and being honest with where they feel the book is at as well. So this is another thing that you really have to decide for yourself which direction to go in, and there's no one right answer. It's also probably something that's going to change with each book, because when you're on your first book and you finish this first round of revisions, you might really be unsure whether you achieved the things that you set out to do, whether the book makes sense, whether it's a satisfying read, and from there it might be great to either give it to an alpha reader or to work with a professional if that's something that you're interested in. Versus, let's say you've written 8 books at this point, you might be able to look at the book objectively and say, yes, I know that I checked all these boxes, I know that I pulled off exactly what I was going for, and I'm ready to move on to a line edit. I'm ready to move on to the next step in the process. So this is going to be something that is ever changing. Every single book I've written has changed slightly in terms of not only how I write it, but also how I approach every round of revision. So don't feel like you have to lock yourself into a really specific revision style, because as you evolve as a writer, your revising process is going to evolve as well. So that is how I used to revise my books. That is how I suggest newer authors tackle that first round of developmental revisions. Now I'm going to tell you how I handle them as an author who is gearing up to publish book 14. So I have done this many, many times. I have learned what works for me, what doesn't work for me, the kind of non-negotiables in terms of how I need to work through my process. And there are even some things that I've kind of totally thrown out that I don't do anymore. And again, that's just because I have done it so many times. All right, so my process now, it's kind of funny. My editing process, that first round of developmental revisions, actually starts before I have even finished the book. And what I mean by that is while I am writing my first draft, and I write in Microsoft Word, I have played with writing in Scrivener. I used to use it years ago, but at this point, the simplicity of Microsoft Word is what works best for me. So I use Microsoft Word to write every single draft. It's like the only thing that I write in. And while I am writing, I use the marginal comment function to leave notes to myself. So often I know when I haven't quite nailed something, like a comment I left for myself in A Witch and Her Minotaur. One that I can think of because I looked at it today was revise this conversation so it sounds more natural. And that is a small revision note to myself. And as soon as I was done writing that dialogue, I knew this is going to need more work in the next draft. But instead of wasting my time sitting there pondering, staring at it, wondering how I can fix it, I leave myself a revision note. And this is something I do throughout the entire first draft. So we might get notes like that on dialogue, and those are, you know, more closely aligned to probably line level revisions, just making things sound better. But there can also be much larger revisions. You know, I need to add a scene here in which this happens. Or I often kind of leave my chapters off in abrupt places, and I make a note for myself that I want to come back in, expand this scene, and make sure that it ties up nicely, maybe with a little bit of a cliffhanger to keep people turning the pages. So that is where my revision process starts. It starts when I am writing my first draft. So depending on the book, I might have, you know, 10 comments to myself, or I might have 30 comments to myself. And that doesn't really have to do with my outlining. It doesn't have to do with any one thing so much as the fact that every single book is different. Every book I kind of see as like this living, breathing thing, and none of my books work exactly the same way every time. So I have some first drafts, like this one actually, that need a lot of revision. When I finished A Witch and Her Dragon, I knew that it was thin. I had to write it fast because I was working on a tight deadline. And when I went back in to do the developmental revision, I ended up adding many chapters. I want to say I added like 3 or 4 chapters to this book. And for me, that's a lot because I have kind of honed my storytelling and how I like to write my books. And usually I don't have to write 4 new chapters, but for this book, it just needed it. So it was a little bit different in terms of the process than the books that came immediately before it. So that is the first thing I do. I leave those marginal comments. Now, something I don't do anymore is print out the book. That used to be really helpful for all of the reasons that I listed, but these days I just don't need to do that. I have a much better grip on my stories, my story worlds, my characters, their arcs, their goals and intentions, what they're trying to achieve. And I don't find it helpful to print out an entire book and need to read through it and make all my notes in that way. But I will say that what I still like to do is take that break. And like I mentioned earlier, I tend to take about a 2-week break. I also schedule my writing projects many months in advance. I think at this point I'm scheduled up the next 12 months. So I have relatively rigid dates, timelines, and structures for myself. So when I say I like to take 2 weeks off, that's something that I actually schedule into my calendar. I take those 2 weeks, and during those 2 weeks, I will either be doing no writing and giving myself a total break if I feel I need that, or more often than not, I usually pick up a different project. Whether that is reading through a rough draft, which is what I did on my break from A Witch and Her Minotaur. I started reading through a contemporary romance draft that I was working on last year. So I might do that. I might start outlining the next book in the series. It's really fluid. It's whatever I feel like I need to do during those 2 weeks, but I just have to make sure to stay away from the book that I'm working on. And it really helps me to come back feeling refreshed. So I do still take time off. I no longer print the book out. I do still like to make the chapter by chapter summary. That is still helpful, but I will be honest and say that I don't always do it. It's one of those things where, like with this book, which needed a lot of chapters added and things fleshed out, it was helpful. But with The Witch and Her Minotaur right now, I think that I summarized the first like 5 chapters and then I stopped doing it just because I felt like it wasn't helping me at that point. So the chapter by chapter summary is something that I sometimes do and I sometimes don't. And again, it just has to do with where do I feel like that book is at? How much work do I feel like I need to put into it? And am I really gonna have to go back into this outline and have that overview and move big pieces around? That also happened on one of my previous books, the second book in my Pure Blood Daughter trilogy, which is a like vampires meet Bridgerton romance. So the Pure Blood Princess needed a ton of revision. So that was one where I was not only needing to add chapters, but I had to really go in and restructure my beats because I had gotten them wrong. So that one really needed the chapter by chapter summary so that I could see what do I currently have and then start moving those chapters around in the outline and get that figured out before I went back into my actual Word document and started dragging my chapters around and rearranging them. So again, really just depends on what the book needs and how messy it is when I finish my first draft. So from there, I just dive right in, and similar to how I revised my early books, I still do full passes. I do not jump chapter to chapter because I get confused, and it's really important for me to make sure that any details I introduce or any plot threads that I start weaving in chapter 1, that I am seamlessly weaving those throughout the entire book. And what is really, really helpful that I didn't mention on at the beginning of this video is that sometimes when you're sitting down and you're working on your first draft, or maybe every single time for me, you might not know your characters that well. You might not know your world that well. So while you're writing it, you might feel like you're kind of swimming in the dark and you're not really sure what you're doing, and that's okay, because I still often feel like that. And I especially feel like that when I am writing the first book in a new series. You know, once I'm on book 3 or 4, I have that world really figured out in my mind. But if I'm starting the first book of a new series, I have to, you know, develop all of that, and I have to figure out all the details and how the world works. So for me, when I write that first draft, I often leave things very thin. I'm a little bit of an underwriter, but with that first revision, the first developmental revision, I'm adding a lot to it because suddenly I've spent an entire book with my characters in this world, and I know my characters better. I know how they speak. I know how they carry themselves and how they interact with other characters. And I also know the world that they're moving through. So when I start this revision, I love to go through chapter by chapter in a linear fashion, and that allows me to make sure that every detail I'm giving the reader is consistent, that every single time I have dialogue from a character, it is in their voice and it makes sense for who they are. And if I'm jumping around too much, it makes it much harder to make sure that every single thread is being woven through, and that it's being woven through in a way that feels organic and enjoyable to a reader. So that is still the same. I still work beginning to end. The number of revisions that I need to do on a book is something that still changes. There are some books I write, like, for example, this book, The Witch's Spell. This is book 4 in my Season of the Witch Quartet. There are some books I write, like this one, that don't need a whole lot of developmental revision because I just knew the world, I knew the characters, and I really knew what my goals and intentions were, and I achieved those. So sometimes I will do, you know, a developmental revision, and after that, I don't need to do any more content revision. I don't force myself to do multiple rounds of developmental revision if I don't feel that the book needs it. But then there are books like this one that do need that have been so muddled up and moved around and so changed that I need to kind of get a bead on where the book is at when I'm done with that revision. And at that point, I have to start the process again, start reading through from beginning to end and making revisions as I go along. So the number of revisions changes, but you know, a lot of the other things don't. So I have brought many elements over from my early process and my early books, and I have slowly let go the ones that no longer serve me, while also adding other ones like the marginal comments, for example, that have made my process a lot smoother. So every single book you revise, you're going to get better at this. You're going to develop your own style, because I can sit here all day and tell you how I do it or how I suggest you do it. But at the end of the day, your brain is different from mine, and the way that you write your books is going to be different from how I write my books. So it's something that you just have to do over and over. And in terms of, you know, if I'm talking to an author and sharing my one biggest tip as a writer, it's to write many, many, many books. Write them and edit them and publish them and just keep doing it over and over, because that is how you really find your style and your voice and find what feels good for you as a storyteller. So after all of these books, like I said, I'm coming up on my 14th. This is how I now revise my books. I have shared with you how I used to revise my books, and I really hope that you were able to take something from this. I had a few questions on YouTube about this very thing. One was, could you explain in more depth how to self-edit a novel in the best way possible? Another was, do you have any advice on revising a novel? I've done it once for middle grade, but I ended up doing 4 drafts, which just goes to show every single book will need a different number of revisions. Do you have any tips for developmental editing? So I do hope that this video answers those questions. And of course, if you have any other questions about how I do my revising or how I suggest to my clients to do their revisions, please feel free to drop those in the comments down below. If you are looking for an editor, our editorial team at Enchanted Ink Publishing does still have availability for fall and the beginning of the winter season. However, we will be a little bit limited because of the holidays. So if you know that you would like to work with us, whether that's a manuscript critique, line editing, copy editing, or proofreading, you can come visit us at www.enchantedinkpublishing.com. We also have 2 cover designers on our team now. You can get booked with them. And we also offer interior formatting services. We have recently kind of unveiled our special edition formatting. So if you are going to be releasing a special edition of your book soon, especially, you know, maybe this is like a Kickstarter, I would love if you would come check us out. Again, that will be linked down below. We have done such beautiful, fun, special edition designs recently, and we're totally hooked on this. So we would love to get our hands on your special edition manuscripts. Again, come visit us at enchantedinkpublishing.com, and you can fill out a service inquiry, and we will try to get back to you within 2 business days. All right, everybody, I hope you enjoyed this tips video. It's been a long time since I sat and did a tips video, but I am hoping to get back into a rhythm of vlogging and then doing a sit down and chat, answering your questions. I would like to ease myself back into that again. So if you have questions or ideas for upcoming videos, things that you would kind of like my 2 cents on, I would love if you would drop them in the comments below. And I keep kind of a running list of the questions I've been asked and the videos I want to film. So make sure you're dropping them in the comments so that I can get your video ideas on my list. I hope that you are having a beautiful August wherever you are, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.